Hello, I'm Gus Downing, the publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the LP News Network. We're here today at the Loss Prevention Research Council's Precision LP Impact Conference, being held at the University of Florida from October 2nd to October 4th, 2017. This episode today is the fourth in a series of 7 episodes designed to give you a thorough understanding of the only team-driven LP and AP academic efforts. And we hope that you watch the entire series and learn how an academic approach is helping LP and AP impact the total retail enterprise. We'd like to thank CAM Connections, a division of ADT, for having the vision and commitment to the industry for sponsoring the entire series, and we invite you to thank them directly by visiting their website or pinging them on social media. So let's get started. Today's session is entitled the LPR Research Update. It basically is put together so that we can kind of get a feel for where they are and what they're doing. And with us today to discuss it is Dr. Stuart Strome, research scientist for the Loss Prevention Research Council. Stuart, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Gus.
At the LPRC, they continue to work on ways to help retailers sell more while losing less, using in-store and supply chain innovations, interviewing offenders, shoppers, and employees, while analyzing large data sets in conducting randomized controlled trials in active locations. A major LPRC research focus is better understanding the psychology of how LP and AP efforts actually affect human behavior in stores and in DCs. They look at how and where LP should place deterrent treatments to make the most positive impact with the least negative shopper and employee effects. Stuart, once again, thanks for being here.
Thank you again, Gus.
Now, you're going to be talking about something that I think is interesting to all of us in LP, and that is offender interviews. You know, I mean, you folks actually go very in-depth in that. And could you give us some of the key points you cover and how you go about doing it and such?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first off, it's important to note that with offender interviews, one of the key reasons we do them is because we're not looking necessarily to replicate some sort of sterile lab environment. We're looking to sort of solve problems in the real world. And for LPAP, that's really important. I mean, you have a retail environment where you're going to have a bunch of different factors that are going to affect shrink, are going to affect human behavior. And in order to really study that, you have to get at the root of the problem. And the root of the problem here is going to be the offender, of course. So the way we go about it is, I mean, in terms of recruiting offenders, we use what's called usually snowball sampling. Snowball sampling involves finding an offender and then basically asking them to suggest other offenders, right? And this sort of gives us a network of people that we can interview, and it makes, and I mean, it of course makes our job a little easier. That's a good thing, but it also means that we're going to find the people that we really want to talk to, and in a sense, the most qualified people for the job. You know, so in terms of getting the offender viewpoint, we want to see exactly what it is they're noticing when they come in the store. What's going to deter them, how it's going to deter them, and things like, you know, how you place it or how you defeat certain products. So, you know, one of the examples I have, it was really interesting, was there's a certain technology, and this happened a couple of weeks ago, that it's a very popular technology. I don't want to necessarily call it out, but you know, we talked to the offender and we asked them, is this going to deter you? They said, absolutely not. And we were sort of surprised that, you know, just the cavalier attitude they had towards this measure. And the person I asked, you know, I asked her why this wouldn't deter you. She said, you know, look, we have WD-40, we take it right off. So, I mean, you would not get that viewpoint if you were just, you know, asking regular people.
Right, you get a realistic response.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's sort of key to evidence-based practice. Mm-hmm. That you have to look at the population you're trying to study and understand them. Mm-hmm. And that's why we do you know, offender interviews.
How many do you do in a year given time? I mean,
it's sometimes hundreds.
Yeah.
So I believe we have around 300 offender interviews in our database.
Mm-hmm.
We've done, at least since I've been here, about 50.
And you go after different aspects of retail with them. I mean, you'll actually focus on one specific channel when one set of offender interviews, and I mean, you'll question them based on the different research that you're doing at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not asking them the same questions. We may ask them technology-specific questions. We may ask them, for example, sort of the different elements of deterrence. So, for example, for a deterrent to be credible, it has to be seen, it has to be understood, and it has to be, well, sorry to be redundant, but credible. It has to be feared. We call this our see-get-fear model. So we'll ask them different aspects of that. And we'll really try to do some open-ended interviews where we just talk to them a little bit and get their perspective and don't ask them yes or no questions, but really go in depth, you know, have them discuss how they defeat a certain technology or what techniques they use to shoplift.
Mm-hmm. And how do you go about finding these offenders and the selection process and such?
Well, the selection process is, I mean, a lot of it is just sort of advertisement. Sometimes it's going to be word of mouth. Sometimes our retailers will actually help us by putting us in contact with ex-offenders, and they can be helpful too, of course, if they haven't been out of the game too long. So usually it's those sorts of channels. Sometimes we'll even put out advertisements if we have to, but usually we try to recruit them from a pool of qualified offenders that we A, already know, or B, have been recruited by LPRC.
And you'll do this throughout the country? I mean, you'll go in different markets and do it, or is there a focus in Florida, which is where you're located?
Well, as much as possible. We try to sort of, have them geographically dispersed, but just by virtue of us being in Gainesville, a lot of them take place here at our store labs in Gainesville, yes.
Do you try to categorize them in age groups and such, socioeconomic backgrounds and such, in order to make sure your research is rated, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we take all sorts of individual level factors into consideration. I mean, age, education level, gender was another big thing. So all of those sort of individual level variables have some bearing on what they're going to say. We think, we hypothesize that it may have some bearing on what they're going to say. So we try to gather as much data as we can. It's always good to have as much data as you can, because you can always pare it down, but after a project's done, you can't gather more data.
Right. And you do this around basically shoplifting, and do you cover ORC? Do you cover robberies? Do you cover violent crime? I mean, do you go to that extent?
Well, we are branching out into that somewhat. With the offender interviews, it's difficult because violent offenders are violent offenders, and hopefully we're not going to be interviewing them because hopefully they'll be
not violent,
not on the street, or not violent, right? So for most of what we've done has concerned shoplifters. But we do collect some other really, really interesting data on violent crimes, on burglaries, on robberies, and that sort of stuff. And we really are branching out. So, and we're also working with law enforcement as well to sort of see what are some areas of collaboration, what are some ways we could sort of get this data and study it and really make some interesting projects out of it.
You mentioned see it, select it, fear it.
Yeah, see, get, fear. Yeah.
See, get, fear. Could you lengthen that or discuss it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea behind a credible deterrent is basically you need three things to have a credible deterrent. Number one, a person has to see it. They have to notice it's there. So you take, for example, a camera, right? If a person doesn't know the camera's there, it's not going to have any bearing on their behavior at all. They're just going to go in and take the product and leave. So number one, but if they see a camera, that's great. That's the first step.
So that's see it.
That's see it, yes, exactly. But they also have to understand the purpose of that camera. So we've had people that we've interviewed, and we'll show them where a camera's hidden, for example, and they'll say, oh, I didn't think that was a camera at all. I thought that was a smoke detector. Well, if you think that technology is a smoke detector, again, it's not going to have much bearing on your behavior, right? So you have to understand the technology. See, that's get, right? And then finally, a deterrent has to be credible. And for it to be credible, you have to know, basically, there's someone behind it, right? That there's someone that's going to notice that you're shoplifting, or there's going to be video evidence, or something to increase the perception of risk to you, right? And that's our fear element, right? That,
which delivers a consequence.
Exactly, which delivers a consequence, right? Whether that consequence means getting caught by the LPAP professional at that time or providing video evidence that can be used to prosecute. So all those three elements in some capacity are necessary for a deterrent to be credible.
So, and I would imagine then the most popular thing, like we said, is shoplifting deterrence, products along product protection and such. I mean, that's really where that's generated the most.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of our, I mean, really, the cool thing about these concepts is that they are just that. They are concepts that can be applied to almost any technology. I mean, you could name a technology and I can tell you how it's going to, how it's going to be a credible deterrent. So we look at any technology along those elements, see, get, fear, but we also want to see what we call the mechanism of action, how this technology alters the incentives at the time of the crime occurs. And we sort of categorize that along 3 dimensions, and that's effort, risk, reward. So any technology that you have, the idea is you want it to increase the effort to the potential offender. Whether that, I mean, something as simple as a door lock, right? That's going to deter a lot of people because some people aren't going to go to the length to break down a door to get into your establishment after closing hours, right? So effort, that's effort. Risk, you want to increase the perception of risk. Right? And we just went over this with the video camera, right? So, and then finally, you want to diminish the potential reward. So a perfect example of this is an ink tag, right? An ink tag means you can take the product out of the store, but if you're going to use that shirt or pair of pants or whatever, you have to break that ink tag, and that ink tag is going to ruin your product. You're not going to be able to sell it. You're not going to be able to wear it, or unless you want to look silly, I suppose.
So, and I would imagine that you have varying degrees in both of these, see, get, fear, in the latter one that you just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think with any technology, I mean, some technologies are going to do all 3. They're going to increase effort, they're going to increase risk, they're going to diminish reward. I'm thinking of something like some sort of product protection wrap or tether, right? That's going to increase the risk because usually there's an EAS tag or something that's going to alert, LPAP professionals. That's going to increase the effort. It's going to increase the risk. It's going to increase the risk. It's going to increase the effort because now you have to remove that product protection device, and that's a pain, And some of them are going to decrease reward because if you remove it, it's going to damage the product in some way, So yeah.
Have you done any research using this in the pre-screening world of pre-employment screening, like psychological evaluation and such, and taken the offenders and had them take some of these tests? Have you done anything there?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. So the psychological evaluation points, I'm not sure that we do a lot of that necessarily with you mean sort of understanding how they see, get, and fear each of our technologies?
Well, by taking the pre-employment screening psychological evaluation, products, you can see how they respond or try to fool the test and how they try to get through it. So if you take that and apply it to offender interviews, I would imagine it'd be quite interesting to see.
I mean, I don't think we've done much of that, but I think that's an interesting point, and it's definitely something we should look into. Yeah.
So, what data do you collect when you study a solution? Let's go right straight to a solution. I mean, if somebody a retailer or a solution provider brings you a solution and say, go test this, what kind of data do you collect?
Well, we collect 3 types of sort of human behavior data, or basically data that involves human subjects. Customer, offender, associate, right? We want to get the customer viewpoint because we want to know, is this device going to just sort of impede the customer experience in any way? If it's something that's going to really upset customers so they don't want to shop at your outlet, you probably don't want to put it on your products, right? Or you don't want to have it in your store. So we want to do that. Or if it's something that's meant to make a customer feel safer or more secure, we want to make sure it serves that purpose, right? So the second one, of course, is offender interviews. And I've sort of mentioned this before. We collect all sorts of data about, do they notice? Do they see it? Do they get it? Do they fear it? We also want to get more what's called open-ended data about how they defeat products or which techniques they use to steal. So stuff like that. And then finally, we want to get associate data, right? Because the associates are going to be the ones that are implementing these solutions. So we want to make sure that any solution is going to be easy to use. It's not going to be too cumbersome. It can be so that it can be implemented effectively. Right? So those are the 3 types of sort of human subject data. Now beyond that, of course, we get data, sales and shrink data. Of course, that's our big, I guess what we call dependent variable, right? The performance measure. And we do that through like hand counts, cycle counts. We cooperate with retailers to get official loss data and of course official sales data. in as much as we can get that, right? But I also want to talk a little bit about what other sort of factors are going to influence whether or not a technology is effective. And we went through a few of these earlier, right? So there's what we call in social science individual level and environmental level data, right? So individual level data is some characteristic that's essential to the person you're interviewing, right? We talked about this: gender, age, socioeconomic status, education. All of these are going to perhaps have some bearing on how a person is going to respond to a technology. So we want to gather all that data, as well as questions that will ask them about the technology itself, right? So we want to get that. But also, we operate off of what's called situational crime prevention, which basically says that environments offer incentives for people to steal. And if you can alter those incentives, you can prevent a person from committing a crime. So for example, we want to take all sorts of environmental level data. So all sorts of, just things like, where is the store located? Are there particular characteristics about that store, whether it be store layout, whether it be the number of associates, whether it be the training level of the associates, right? What sorts of protection measures are in place other than the ones that we're looking at, right? So we want to take all those factors into consideration. And beyond that, we even want to take factors that are particular to the technology that we're studying, right? So I just got done doing a learning lab about placement of enhanced public view monitors. And what we found was, you can put a public view monitor in your retail outlet and perhaps it'll work. And that's great if it does. But there's all sorts of factors that are going to go into, that are going to dictate whether people see it, right? And that's what our study was on, noticeability. Things like the height of the EPVM, things like the border color of the EPVM, whether or not it makes a sound. And then to make it more complicated than that, these things, there's called interaction effects. Basically, that different combinations of these factors are going to influence whether or not offenders see that EPVM. And of course, those results may be different from whether customers see that EPVM or associates, operate it correctly, right? So there's all sorts of things we have to study. Right. And I think that's, so the data we collect is really particular to the question we're asking. And that's how you conduct good social science. You identify a research question, and then you tailor the survey or you tailor the data to answer that question in particular.
And it's all about altering behavior.
Yeah, I think so.
On the part of the criminal and such.
Yeah, absolutely. It's altering behavior. It's basically, behavioral science. It's sort of that's a new buzzword in social science nowadays. But basically all it means is altering incentives and altering human behavior and really understanding the psychology of how people operate. And that's what we try to do at the end of the day.
What kind of research can the LPRC do that individual retailers can't?
Well, that's a good question, right? I mean, I think there are a few points to be made here. Number one, the LPRC allows a type of collaboration among retailers that wouldn't exist otherwise. Different retailers collect different data, or different retailers operate in different sectors or operate in different regions, right? So we act in many ways as a facilitator of collaboration to say, like, what data are you collecting? Okay, that's great. What data are you collecting? Is there a way we can harmonize this? So if you are a retailer that has a new problem, hopefully we have the answer because we have this sort of retail collaboration and data harmonization, right? So that's number one. I think that we act to sort of facilitate collaboration where there would otherwise not be collaboration, I think the second thing too is, my sense is LPAP departments for retailers, you don't have the time to sit here and engage in deep thought, right? To sort of like conceptualize how all these technologies are going to work. So, I mean, that's sort of our job, right? I mean, we're research professionals.
You're the LP think tank.
We're the LP think tank, exactly, right? And I mean, we have, like, all of our research scientists have training in research methods. A lot of us have training in survey methodology. And on top of that, and I think this is really the great part, and you mentioned this before, it's pretty unique to have something like the LPRC housed in an academic institution, because you have access to all these resources that you otherwise wouldn't. And I mean, we have access to, three different supply chain groups that study supply chain in 3 different colleges at the University of Florida. We have an institution that just focuses on survey research. So, the devil's in the details when you're dealing with research, and the devil's in research design. And if you don't get the research design right, you're going to have invalid results. And that's what we do well. We get the research design right, so you have valid results.
And you have the retail center here as well at the University of Florida.
Exactly. You have the retail center. You have the Miller Retail Center. You have the College of Business, right? You have our innovation lab here, our LPRC innovation lab, where essentially you have, I mentioned earlier that you don't necessarily want a lab environment, but sometimes you do.
Right.
Sometimes you actually want a lab environment to study questions you otherwise wouldn't be able to address. So we have that, right here on campus. We have our store labs here, and all of this is within sort of a 10-mile radius. And add that to the expertise that comes with being at a top 10 university. I think it's really a winning combination.
Now, when you mention store labs, that's a lab in a retail store specifically.
Yes.
Okay.
So I have to distinguish. We have our innovation lab, and that is the lab where we sort of highlight a number of different products, and we identify their modes and mechanisms of action, how they work, and sometimes we actually conduct research there, whether it be offender interviews or time studies, stuff like that. But we also have our store labs, and this is where I think it's essential that you mention that this research has to take place in the real world. And we have collaborations with Walmart, we have collaborations with Best Buy, we have collaborations with CVS, and these store labs are actually going to, they don't mimic a retail environment, they are the retail environment, and it's important that you see how these technologies work in those retail environments. So, I think you'd be hard pressed to find that sort of collaboration at another place. Yeah.
Stuart, thanks for being here today.
Thank you, Gus.
Well, that's it for this episode, ladies and gentlemen. And we'd like to once again thank CAM Connections, a division of ADT, for sponsoring the entire series. If you see one of their team members, make sure you thank them directly or ping them on social media. So until next time, let's keep them all safe out there.